on behalf of the 2,400 playwrights around the world, including here in South America, that we support each year, our amazing staff who not only are surviving tornadoes, but have been doing an incredible job over the past couple of years of sustaining and lifting and holding artists, our board and everyone else. We're so thrilled to have you join us for the very first Artists in Conversation of this season. This is our 50th anniversary season. We are super excited to be in this moment and to be sharing it all with you. I see so many people that are around the country. So hello around the country, friends. So lovely to see your names. We are sending you so much love and hoping you're doing well. Hayley and I, who you'll meet just in one moment, our incredible associate artistic director, have been talking a lot about what are the conversations we wanted to have, and certainly sort of conversations around healthy creation space. We're certainly not the first ones to be having those conversations, but we wanted to get some perspectives of some different folks who are doing the work, who are thinking the think, but doing the work in the field, locally, nationally, and internationally. And with Amrita and Rachel and James, you are in for a wonderful conversation. So I just wanted to say hello, buenas noches. It's so great to see you all. And I look forward to listening to the conversation right alongside you. Hayley Finn, our most amazing associate artistic director. Hi, Hayley.
Hi, Jeremy.
How's it going?
Things are good so far. No, nothing yet. Nothing too alarming at the moment with the tornado watch.
Fingers crossed. This is Hayley Finn, who's our amazing associate artistic director. And one of the things that means at the Playwright Center is that Hayley, who's worked at the organization for a number of years, has been thinking about how we as a field want to move forward, how we take our work and think it out loud, and really to hear from our colleagues around what's happening in particular for playwrights and in the world of new work. And there's so much exciting happening. So under Hayley's guidance and leadership, we are moving forward tonight. I'm excited to see all of you here have a wonderful conversation. Hayley, I pass it off to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us from Argentina. We miss you.
Well,
ciao. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Jeremy said, I'm Hayley. I use she, her pronouns, and I am so excited to be with you this evening. I know many of you who've signed on, such amazing artists and leaders and thinkers and friends in the audience. So I'm so happy that you're in community with us this evening. As we begin, we always want to acknowledge that the Playwright Center is on the traditional land of the Dakota people and the Anishinaabe Ojibwe people. We offer our gratitude to this land for the privilege of gathering and for the work of Native and Indigenous activists, past, present, and future, who steward this land and challenge us to be partners rather than owners of it. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to prepare for a healthy creative process. What are the values that we want to center, and what are the approaches and practices that we find most helpful? And as Jeremy said, we have amazing people who are going to be speaking with us about this. And as you all know, because many of you are doing this work as well and having these conversations, this is a very large topic, and there is so much to cover here that we're not going to be able to discuss it all this evening, which is why we're already planning other conversations in the months to come. In particular, we're going to be having a conversation on how to collaborate with and support the processes of artists with disabilities. And this evening, we have three incredible artists and leaders. So please help me welcome to the screen Amrita Ramanan and James and Rachel Bonds. Thank you. So good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Before we get started, I just want to say that these three women really inspire me in my own work and practice. So thank you for being here. And I know that you all have received their bios, so you know how amazing they are. So I'm going to do shorter versions of the bios right now, and you can read more about them on a little bit later. So let's start with Amrita. Amrita Ramanan is a multidisciplinary artistic leader who holds the values of anti-racism, anti-colonialism, equity, access, diversity, and inclusion at the core of her practice. She currently holds the role of senior cultural strategist and dramaturg for Play on Shakespeare. In her 5 seasons as Director of Literary Development and Dramaturgy at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Amrita holistically supported new play commissioning and development for the festival. She served as the production dramaturg for many productions at OSF and curated the Black Swan Lab for our new play development. Amrita was recently appointed a National Theatre Project Advisor for the New England Foundation for the Arts, and she considers herself a professional advocate for storytellers across all mediums. Thank you, Amrita. Anne C. James has an extensive career in international stage direction and theater education spanning over 3 decades. She recently made her debut as the first Black intimacy coordinator of Broadway for Antoinette Nwondu's Passover. I know we have to do a shout out for Passover. James is an expert at the burgeoning industry of intimacy direction and institutional consent culture for national arts organizations. In addition to her Broadway credit, she served as an intimacy director and sensitivity specialist for the provocative off-Broadway productions of Moises Kaufman's 7 Deadly Sins by Tectonic Theater Project and Seize the King, produced by Classical Theater of Harlem. On the West Coast, James provides consultation and intimacy coordination for the television and film industry, most recently working with Rashida Jones, Mark Wahlberg, and Issa Rae, among many, many others. Thank you for joining us, Anne. And finally, Rachel Bonds. Rachel's plays have been developed or produced pretty much everywhere across the country. Arts Nova, WP Theater, Manhattan Theater Club, McCarter Theater, Roundabout Underground, Atlantic Theater Company, South Coast Rep, La Jolla Playhouse, Studio Theater, Actors Theater of Louisville, William Towns Theater Festival, and New York Stage and Film, among others. She has served, I know, right? She has served as a frequent volunteer playwright for the 52nd Street Project, and she also wrote the very insightful and informative article published by HowlRound, Working Like a Mother. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Big applause. Just imagine everyone's applauding for you. So thank you. We're going to talk as a group for a little while, and then we're going to open it up for some time for questions at the end. When we get to that process, you can just use your Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and Julia will be gathering those questions, and I will field them and share them aloud with the panelists. So now let's get started. We're going to be talking a lot about process this evening. So I want to start at the top of the process on preparation. And Anne, I'm hoping that you can kick us off. As an intimacy coach, what do you do to prepare for a project? And what are the questions that guide you?
Hi, everyone. It's can you hear me? Okay, good. Wow, I'm just so honored to be on this esteemed panel. So hi, very nice to meet you here. A lot of the preparation comes from communicating with several areas of a production. So generally, I am asked to come on to a production by a producer or a production manager or a UPM in the film and television world. And I start asking questions right away. First of all, it's great if I can see the script. So I will ask to see the script because that's where it all begins, Rachel, right? It begins with the words. So I want to see what is in that writer's mind and what they envision. Then when I feel like I kind of have a grasp on it as you know, one entity looking at the text, I then reach out and ask to have an appointment with the director. So then the director and I have a conversation, and I listen and learn about that director's vision for the words. because sometimes they match and sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's okay that they do not match. It's just finding that beautiful area in between where we can bring the text with the vision to life. So I speak with the director and have lots of fun ideating about what they see and what they want to happen either on film or on the stage. Then I ask, and the first time I did this actually was serving as a sensitivity specialist for Twilight Los Angeles 1992 that I just did at Signature Theater. And I had an opportunity to speak to those actors kind of in an informal, get to know you way, to kind of see how their identity met up with the several identities that they were going to portray. So in this play, if you don't know the play, it's by Anna Deavere Smith. Twilight Los Angeles 1992 has over 60 characters. They were once played by Anna Deavere Smith alone. And then she, I think, invited a young man to play all the roles. But now at Signature, the way they just did it is they divided the roles between 5 actors. And so I wanted to speak to each one of those actors about what their consent and boundary work looked like and what they were willing to share and give, sometimes of characters of different culture and race. And so we kind of meted out a safe and brave space for them to dive into those characters wholeheartedly. And that was a really, really special moment. So before any moment with each of those actors, so before I'm even in the rehearsal room, I want to have meetings with at least those 3, well, the writer, the director, and the actors. If I'm lucky and the producer has no idea what I do, I'll get the opportunity to speak to the producer as well in a very informal way of just like, hey, thanks for adding me to the team. This is what I do. So that's generally how I prepare before I even step into the rehearsal room.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anne. It's really helpful to hear those questions. And that sounds like a fascinating project that you got a chance to work on. I saw the original with Anna Deavere Smith performing, and so it'd be really exciting to see this version.
Yeah.
Amrita, I want to turn it over to you and ask, how do you prepare when you're working with writers? And what sort of processes are you using to create a creative and healthy space?
Thank you, Hayley. Hey, everyone. So grateful that we could be in this space together, sharing this conversation. So I feel really blessed to be a practicing dramaturg. I love the practice of dramaturgy, and I love working with storytellers. So it truly is a blessing and a gift. And part of my identity that I want to share in the context of this conversation leading into the question is I'm also an individual who lives with chronic illness. And part of my life as being a sick person and part of my advocacy in the reality of my illness being at times perceived as visible, at times being perceived as invisible, is how to advocate for holistic health in the process of creation, and how one's mental, physical, and spiritual health should not come at a sacrifice for our creativity and how we can develop stories. So when I'm connecting with writers, and we're building that relationship and investigating what the process is moving forward, the first question I ask is, what is your process? How do you like to work as a writer? What do you need and what do you want, which can sometimes result in similar responses or different responses? And how can we make this the most healthy process for you? And with that, having healthy be a very open definition, because I think that can mean many things. And from there, I've worked between a number of regional theaters, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Arena Stage, Shakespeare Theater Company, as well as organizations now like the Playwright Center, where I'm, dramaturg for the Core Apprentices. And I really look at, what are the structures at play to support process, and what can we then encourage for change and for activation in that change? And I truly believe as a dramaturg that it is essential to be an advocate for the writer, and really essential to consider what that process means in relationship to the goals and intentions that are set. So a lot of a lot of the prep work is very intimate conversation. For me, healthy creation space also involves asking about food and hydration. What's the sustenance that's really helpful in a process that we can encourage? And what's the community? What's the community around the process? And then taking the steps to build that together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Amrita. We're so happy that you're able to work with us at the Playwright Center as well. So thank you. Rachel, speaking of playwrights, I'm going to pass it over to you. As a playwright and also as a mother, I would love to hear about how you're preparing, in advance of a rehearsal process, and what that you found as people are trying to prepare for you, or accommodations that have you found really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, hi everyone. I'm very honored to be here. It's shifted considerably over the past. Well, let's see. My son was born 5 years ago, and I had 2 world premieres that year that he was born, because everything happens at once, and. At that time, a lot of what I had to do was lots of prep work to understand how to pump breast milk, and make sure there was a space for me to do that. There was time for me to do that. That was also not necessarily the equity break, because I also needed a break.
Absolutely. Yes.
So trying to maneuver with the director and the stage manager, time for me to do that. That's felt good for everybody, especially for me. That was one big thing. That was the major thing when I was working in New York. It was my only New York production. And I just had to do a lot of preparation for where can I be, when can I be there. And then there were some days I got overworked and I got kind of sick, and I was like, there were some days where I just needed to bring the baby with me. And so there was also a lot of figuring out how and when to do that. Which isn't, it's not straightforward. I was like in the lobby with him, and then I would like pop into tech and then pop back out. But it takes a lot of planning. And at that time I had no idea what I was doing. So it wasn't very well planned because I was doing all the planning. The theater was helpful, but I needed to instigate everything. There was not a lot of, there was a little bit of help from them, but they didn't know what questions to ask me. And so it was all on me to do the planning. The second production then was out of town. So that involved me doing a lot of figuring out, what is the artist housing? Is there enough room for me, the baby, and my mom came with me. So I needed, typically artist housing is like very minimal. You live in like a studio apartment, maybe. Sometimes you share an apartment. And so I had to ask for something more than that, which meant I said, I need more rooms, because my mom in her late 60s needs to be able to sleep comfortably so she can hang with the babe while I'm at rehearsal. And there was a lot of, and I had to fly across the country with all of our stuff. So there was just a ton of preparation for that. Again, it was all me. planning it. And I think now that things are shifting, theaters are learning what questions to ask, and artists are learning what they can ask for. But now he's 5, and so my needs are different. I don't need a lactation room anymore, but I do need to, like, the production I just did at McCarter, I worked out a schedule with the director and stage manager where I was there for 4 out of the 6 hours, and then I would go home because I wanted to see my kid before he went to bed.
Yeah, understandably.
And I was commuting to Princeton, so you know, just way before we started rehearsal, I just sat down with them and I said, "This is what I need. I think I won't be there for the whole day every day. I need to leave at 4." And like occasionally that I would shift that if it felt okay, but I went ahead and asked for that right up front. Just to be really specific about what time, how I wanted to handle my time.
Yeah. That's really helpful to hear, Rachel. I think not only is that important, obviously, to you, but I can imagine that you were setting a path for other mothers coming into the theater so that maybe then the theater will know those questions and be able to be better prepared.
I also, and I do want to give a shout out to dads. I want dads to be able to also feel like, hey, I need to leave 2 hours early, because they should share the caretaking. and I think they don't always, because they don't necessarily have the physical, they're not lactating, but you know, it's important to me for them to also feel like they can ask for things.
Absolutely.
To take care of their kids. Yeah,
definitely. Well, as you're saying, as things are shifting, we are hoping as a field that we are shifting towards the better, towards the more conscious. So I think that's also part of why I'm so glad that we're having these conversations, because the more information sharing, the better. So thank you for sharing that. I want to get onto the next question, which is, you know, let's imagine, okay, we've done our preparation. Now we're in the rehearsal room. What are the practices that we want to put into place? So I'm going to have you start, Rachel, this time, to say, what are some of the practices or approaches that you found are helpful in the rehearsal room, you know, either as a writer or as a writer mother, however you want to address it?
I think, you know, I haven't been in the rehearsal room in almost 2 years now, which is really sad and hard. And I honestly don't know when I'll be back in one. Well, maybe in February, hopefully. I find it really useful to upfront on that first day, spend like much of the time community building. I think it's really important that for me, and I think for everyone, to set a tone of kindness, respect, and kind of establish a code of conduct for everybody. And not just the cast, but, you know, everybody, because everybody is making this piece of art happen, right? I think that's really important. I haven't really fully experienced it myself, but I think I've been thinking a lot about it. I think that we don't spend enough time doing that. And I think it could be really, it's hard because we all just like want to get to the work, you know, and I want to get to the work, but I think the work is monumentally better if we set that tone first. Yeah. What else? I don't know.
Yeah, and I was like, great, and jump in.
No, that's brilliant. I really do agree with what Rachel's saying, and you know, I feel it's really, really important to establish community agreements and have the people in the room who are going to create this cast And you know, obviously it may begin with the director, it may begin with the actors, or wherever you want to begin. There are people at table who come from different backgrounds, who come from different walks of life. And the first thing you want to do, and you know, I'm a bit of a witch, I'm a little witchy, but this idea of casting, you know, the cast, you know, casting an agreement with the group really sets the tone and pace for what do we do when we get in the difficult moments or the crunchy moments? How do we maneuver through that in a kind and loving way as a family, as opposed to people who've signed contracts to do a certain thing? I really believe in boundary practice, learning boundary practice at the beginning of the process sets the precedent that my body is my body, and I get to give permission to touch it under the auspices and understanding that blocking is going to happen with my body, and that my consent can change depending on how I feel about a certain amount of blocking or a certain choreographed move. So I think boundary practice, boundary check-ins, boundary check-outs are really important when we're in the thick of the blocking stages, and also when we're moving up to running. Those things are vital. And you know, I had a really interesting experience with some content, some charged content in Twilight Los Angeles, and the way the technical, the design of the sound and the design of the video included content that was extremely difficult to bear over and over and over and over again. And so I asked that the design crew, the design team, the sound designer and the video designer, instead of showing that video footage of Rodney King and all the riots and everything that happened, which was part of the play, if they could find a way to replace that footage with static, with white noise and static, to build as a placeholder at the same amount of time, so stage management could call the cues and everything would be timed perfectly, but that the actors and the people in the house wouldn't have to see that footage over and over and over again. And then in final tech, right up to preview, then we started incorporating the actual footage. But it worked wonders, and the actors were so grateful and so thankful. Even the designer, you know, the assistant stage manager, I mean, everybody was just really grateful and didn't know that that could happen. Neither did I. Yeah. I just asked for that.
That's just a great example. That's a great example of like how to change the environment and create a healthier one. I think that's just a really, really terrific example. I want to pick up on another thing that you mentioned, and just dig in a little bit more in the practical sense. You said like casting agreements, which I loved that phrase, but I'm like, okay, in practice, Anne, what does that mean? We're in the room. How are we casting those agreements?
I think, you know, you ask questions. The way I like to direct is I ask a lot of questions. And I know Amrita will understand that process, because you want to know what you should go find out, right? So when you're asking questions about, you know, what does it feel like to be honored and respected in a rehearsal space? And the actors stop and go, oh my God, no one's asked me that question before ever in my life. And the directors are like, do you mean me too? Because no one's ever asked me that question. So asking the question of what would it feel like for you to feel cared for? Does it feel like for you to think about this process and leaving this process stronger than you entered it? So I ask a lot of questions, and then from that, we kind of blackboard it out, you know, write it or whiteboard it out and then we come up with statements. This space is an embodied space, honoring everyone's physicality, honoring everyone's words, honoring space and time for the absorption of charged content. And we create maybe 10 things that people can really lock onto as a cast. And then we print them up, and it becomes a part of the rehearsal room. We tape them up in the hallway. We tape them up so that you are constantly aware that you're cared for and that you matter, and that this is a process that is artful, and that we should move at the speed of trust. And I know that's a bizarre thing to think of when we have no time in the rehearsal room, but it does provide air and space in there, a little bit of breath in there, to honor the humanness in us all.
Thank you for that, Anne.
Yeah.
I think it's such an important thing. I think, Rachel, you brought it up, and Anne brought it up, this idea of we have a sense of no time, or we have to keep rushing, which I think is a failure really of creating art in, this kind of environment. And I know, Amrita, you have thoughts about that. So I'm going to pass it over to you, because I'd love to hear about your processes as you're setting up this healthy environment for rehearsing.
Yeah, I just want to first of all uplift everything that Rachel and Anne said. Yes, yes, yes. And I think what you did with Twilight is brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel that is such a incredible action of care and support. And really, we are speaking about a culture of care, which is both a simple and profound topic when we're dealing with processes that often are within particular constructs of art making. But what does it mean to actually center the person and be in a space of care? That is really like at the heart of it. So I'm very much with that philosophy, and will also just affirm in terms of some other practices that admittedly I have failed many times at, and also have tried to learn outside of it and support others in it. To Rachel's great point, take breaks. Don't use breaks for emails. Don't use breaks for other work. Take those breaks. Let, the mind and the body needs that space for an actual break. And I've encountered so many experiences with artists, and also for myself, where I've just been like, oh, the break is where I can take care of this other thing. And it's like, no, take the break. Take the break. It will make a difference. I am a firm believer in the concept of snacks. Every play that I develop, I ask everyone in the room, what are your dietary preferences? What are your restrictions? And I have 2 tables of snacks and drinks. And just have an open policy where anytime you want to get up and get food and beverages, go for it. I just think sustenance is something that I don't want to take for granted. I grew up in a house of food insecurity. My father grew up in a house of food insecurity. And I think having something available is really important in the cultivation process of developing work. And so that is something that I hold very dear to. And then the other point of it, which I think really speaks to the agreements and culture of care, is embracing a space of care as a priority, but also no guilt or shame for when someone needs to take time off to take care of themselves. And whatever that care may look like, whether that means I am sick, I need to take care of my mental space. Again, something that I and artists I've worked with, I've often seen learned the hard way, where we would be in rehearsal rooms keeling over and then be like, oh, we should probably go home. And what it means to actually establish from the beginning that we embrace one another's health. We want to protect ourselves and protect each other. And so we're going to be very open and proactive about taking that space and returning when we are in a place of better health.
I think that is such a good point. I love the simplicity of the things that you said in terms of taking the breaks, because you would think that would be obvious. And yet I know how many of us have been guilty of that. I mean, certainly I have been guilty of that. And food and drink, and it's so important. And I also just think health. I mean, I think especially before the pandemic, so many us, myself included, would go to work or doing things, not in their optimal shape, because you just kind of have to get through because there isn't enough time, as we talked about. So I think that's really, really important lessons. I want to get to my next question, which is invariably, and I think we've sort of alluded to this a bit through the conversation. Invariably, something sometimes goes wrong, right? It's not always a smooth process. There are bumps along the road, and I'm curious to know how you handle those bumps, because I think that's really a testament to, again, like, how do we create healthy space? Like, do you have an example maybe of a time where something didn't go according to plan, or things went off track, and how you approach that problem solving? And if you don't have an example for yourself, something that you've witnessed that you thought worked really well and that you thought, yeah, I want to take that to my practice. Anyone want to jump in?
I'll just say, I had that year after our son was born, my working experiences were also difficult. And I didn't handle any of them. I mean, I handled them as best I could, but I left that year feeling really angry. And like I wanted to quit. And that I was like, my career is now impossible. I think I have to leave this job. And then that made me really mad. So I wrote that essay.
Which people should read. I just want to uplift that essay that you wrote. It was really amazing.
I think I moved past anger into what can we do about this? Because I can't be the only person who feels like this is impossible, and that I'm physically ill trying to do this job and have a kid, and not only a kid, anyone that you are responsible for. It doesn't have to be a child. I also took care of my dad when he was sick. Like, people have caretaking roles. And I just thought, I can't be the only person who finds this to feel impossible. So I wrote that essay in the hope that we could find some solutions. And I think things are starting to change, not because of what I wrote, but because I think a lot of people are speaking up about just asking for better better treatment, for better options. But that I wrote that because I felt like I had 3 experiences that went really poorly for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, an amazing gift that you really gave the field by writing that essay. Because as I was saying, I think it's not just about you, but really helping other people be able to say, okay, these are the questions I should be asking. Maybe also theater saying, well, maybe these are the things that we should be preparing for,
Yes.
On the flip side of
Yeah.
that.
It's for both, both the artists and the institutions need to know what to ask for, and the artists need to know what to ask for, and the institutions need to know what questions to be asking.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Anne or Amrita, do either of you have any examples to share?
I'm going to be really honest because I don't know how to do it any other way. I just feel like there's a lot of memories that are coming up. I've been in a lot of experiences where there has been harmful behavior, environments that have seen, artists taking care of their health as a sign of weakness and not success or motivation, which I think is really problematic, and different forms of abuse, emotional abuse, other forms of abuse that have occurred. And so, I often think about, within that moment, when something wrong happens, that tends to be motivated by a false sense of urgency, tends to be motivated by other forms of intention or interaction. What is the need for, for healing and protection, and how can there be a prioritization of the individuals involved? So I will say, one benefit I've been able to have in some of my recent experiences, which I hold very dear, is being in cultures where when something went wrong in the rehearsal room, there was a community beyond the rehearsal room of individuals who are willing to hold safe space to then figure out how do we move forward. I've worked with some really incredible producers and advocates, including Mika Cole, Sharifa Joka, Carmen Morgan, who have all been able to really speak to the importance of, how do we actually understand the necessity to sometimes halt a process, to sometimes remove certain individuals from a process, to go back into the culture of a process, as opposed to fighting for the opening night date, or certain aspects like that. And I'm not going to deny it. It's usually hard. It usually has been hard. But also, I want to affirm what Rachel says, where I think I've personally seen more and more artists show their advocacy and hold accountability to what they've experienced, and certain cultures that have shifted. I think a 5-day rehearsal process is very healthy, and I think that has been very supportive. I was talking to a dear actor friend of mine who recently worked at Cal Shakes, and she mentioned that every day began with an hour of just open conversation for individuals to process, whether it means processing what it's like to live in a pandemic, or processing what happened, in the rehearsal room, so that there wasn't kind of a rush of that conversation, that it was just like held. And I found that to be really supportive. So that's kind of a wayward answer, Hayley. I don't know quite I don't know exactly what to do, but I do think the question is so important because it does exist, and what does it mean to continue to build on the questions, to Anne's point of how do we move forward from that, and how do we also embrace the need for disruption.
Right. I love that as a because I think in the examples that you gave, there was the need for disruption. In each of those cases, there was like okay, again, going back to that issue of time, like where time is, this is where we need to spend our time. We need to stop what we're doing and focus here, and really like disrupt the process in order to make a healthier process. So I think that's very informative. Thank you for that offering.
Yeah, I like that idea of disruption. One thing that I have noticed many times in the rehearsal room is that actors will sometimes exhibit a traumatic response called fawning. And it's relatively new. It's fawning, Fawning, like a baby deer. And what it looks like and what it shows up as is when a person in power asks an actor if something is okay, because the person in power wants it to be okay because it is deeply seated in what their desire is. And the actor says, yeah, okay, sure, that's fine. And clearly it's not fine. That is, that actor trying to be a good person in the room, and to not be naughty, and to not be difficult, and to not be a troublemaker, or, labeled as hard to work with, because they don't want to do this crazy ass thing a director wants them to do. And so they acquiesce to it and they say yes. And then that builds inside them. And then so maybe after rehearsal, they have an extra drink. Or maybe they exhibit unsafe sexual practices. Or maybe, it comes up in that person and manifests in a different way because they couldn't say no when they needed to say no. And I've seen that happen several times in rehearsal processes. And so, I often ask in a rehearsal room when I can see that fawning kind of showing up when a director is just kind of going after an actor over and over, asking the question 5 different ways to see. I usually, try to put a kibosh on it, and I say, wait, hold on. Let's just take a moment here. And again, in a rehearsal pressured situation, there's always a, this big sigh. But what we're actually teaching that actor to do is trust themselves and stand up for what their boundaries are, and actually give a consent that is a real consent, as opposed to one that is a fond consent.
That's great, and being able to capture that, being astute enough to sort of see that nuance in the room and say, okay, we need to dig a bit deeper here. That's beautiful. I wanted to kind of get us towards the end of if we're going through the rehearsal process, towards the end of the process, when you've either, it's at the end of rehearsal or the end of a production. I'm curious to know what your processes are around reflection and potentially talking to your collaborators about how it went, if that is folded into your process, and if so, how does that look for you?
Something that I feel is really important in that is having moments of joy and celebration, even through challenge, even through hardship. Just recognizing that we created something together, and how can we celebrate ourselves for going through that journey. And I do believe that joy and celebration is needed more than ever right now. And so I've been thinking more about, what's the way to incorporate that into virtual rehearsal processes, when we're remote, how can that still happen in a way that so often in in-person rehearsal processes or in-person, labs, there's always been usually like shared meals and conversation. I'm like, there's still got to be a way. So, I'd love to hear other ideas, because I think celebration is really critical. With that, I think also, deep and honest reflection, which, sometimes I've really assess kind of the timing of it. I feel, pending on the process and the needs and desires of the collaborators, right after is not always healthy. There needs to be an essential time for rest and recalibration and acknowledging how everyone processes. So sometimes, it's like, all right, let's do it, let's do it a week after, let's give it some space. And sometimes there is this need to be like, while it's fresh, I want to dive in. So kind of calibrating what that is. But I do love, in every process that I have, trying to incorporate some form of reflection and debrief when I can hold that and advocate for that. And then I think, just as more of a personal practice as a dramaturg, I always love to ask a writer kind of, what is the desired next step of this journey, and how can I support you? Even if that means, I want to put this play away for a second and I just want to be supported in my other work, or I want to have a reminder to think about this piece, or I want to be friends and have a phone call, just what is the continuation of a relationship? Because I think whenever we're in that space, it shouldn't be transactional. It should really go beyond whatever the kind of final moment, so to speak, is, like in that like opening or presentation or whatever that is, like what can continue beyond.
Great, thank you for all of those things. I love those ideas. And Rachel?
I mean, right after I always leave after opening, and then I don't usually come back until closing. Maybe I'll come one other night, but right after the performance, it's important to me to go backstage and be just with the artistic, and the stage manager and the ASMs as well. Everyone and the crew, the people who were really making the show happen, the performance happened that night. I think it's important for everyone to just stand in a circle and just be together and say, we made this thing. I think I don't let anybody talk about press or talk about reviews, and I don't want that stuff anywhere near us. I don't want it posted. That is not part of what the artist.
Yeah,
I keep that. I think that's an important rule to me. I don't want anyone to talk to me about it. I don't want it near me. Or I feel very protective of all the artists involved. And then, I usually need some space from the actual art before I can reflect. So probably like a month or two. And then I'll start to ask myself, or, chat with the director, like, what did we figure out the play? What's left to do? And, with this last show I had at McCarter, which was the last show I had, I felt like we didn't figure it out. It was a huge play. 5 weeks was not enough for that play, and I think we got close on it, but I want another go. And I couldn't really feel that right away. I needed a couple months to reflect, and kind of set some goals for the next stage.
That's great. That's great to hear.
I think one practice that I like to use is something that I learned from theatrical intimacy education, Laura Ricard and Chelsea Pace, who are amazing, is this concept of de-rolling. And it's used in drama therapy a lot, but it's the general practice is to be able to put the characters away for the night. And so there's it's a ritualistic kind of practice of maybe you light a candle and then you blow it out and then your character goes to bed for the night. Or maybe it's the last piece of costuming that you take off, and once that last piece of costuming comes off, the character is now in a place where you can rejuvenate and come back to self. So when we're talking about the end of a production, what would it mean for the whole cast to get together for a de-rolling process? I think that would be amazing, and I'm going to go and do it immediately. Thank you, Amrita, for that. And this idea of coming to circle and saying goodbye to the play, or saying farewell to the play, right, Rachel? Because just because a play gets done, that doesn't mean it's over. Sometimes it's the next chapter of a play when we receive it. Or sometimes a cast will give birth to a play, and then the play then lives, and it has an opportunity to live in many different homes for the duration of its life. And so I feel that this de-rolling process is really healthy to just put closure on the whole experience. And now I'm going to be writing a paper about that.
Oh, that's great. I love that, how you're inspiring each other through this conversation. I also just wanted to kind of lift up what I think you mentioned another point, casting the agreements and then the de-rolling. I just hearing a lot of like ritual in your process as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, we could get into it, but the whole basis of my intimacy practice is deeply attentive to ancestral work, working with the ancestors in our DNA to help us move through. And specifically, right now, I'm working with Black women on this process, who often in a play or in a movie or television show will get some of the hardest content to share, our American story. And so we're often the recipients of abuse, or we are forced to look at stories that talk about poverty in America, or various things that are charged content. And so Black women have a very interesting acting process, and the de-rolling of that is certainly something that's very important. And part of that is through the rehearsal process and through the performance process, having an inroad or a way or a pathway to deliver some of the harder parts of those emotions into the DNA of our ancestors, into, passing it upwards so that we can feel lighter through the material and through performing the material. It's kind of like giving part of your load to someone who understands what the weight of that load is because they lived it. And so, yeah, this whole idea of casting and then lifting up the ancestors and allowing them to carry some of the load of the performance and of the artistry of delivering the performance, and then de-rolling and saying goodbye to those characters at the end of a process. So that's kind of my jam. That's what I'm working on.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'd love to take this time to open this up to questions from the audience at this point. And just as a reminder, for questions, if you could use that Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and Julia is going to sort of gather those and send them my way. But I'm also seeing in the chat that people have just been saying that they are agreeing with what you're all saying and loving what you're saying. So that's nice to hear. That it's sort of hard sometimes when we're talking. We don't get to see you all out there, but it's nice to see your presence in the chat and know that people are excited about the insights that are coming forward from this discussion. So while we're waiting for people to sort of populate the chat with some questions, I'm wondering if you have a process that you're working on right now, or something that you're noodling on or thinking about that might relate to this conversation around creative process.
Something that I've been exploring, I think probably for about the past year and a half, but definitely more consciously within the last 9 or so months, is a practice of fallow time. So I really love Bonnie Suey and her work. She's written this great article in the New York Times talking about how you're essentially supporting yourself and your creativity when you're doing nothing, and then also has this book called Why We Swim, and I'll drop that info in the chat. And I have a deep connection with my ancestry towards the cycles of nature. I have ancestors who have farms in Kerala, in India, and so much of the kind of like, oh yay, Anne!
I've been there. I love it.
That's amazing. Oh, I can't wait to talk to you about that. That makes me so joyful. Yes. And so much of the orientation of healthy space in life was also towards the cycles of growth with crops. And what Bonnie posits, which I really love, is that if there is not time for rest, there is not time for growth. So how do we really look at rest complementing our cycles of growth? And so what she proposes is that you try to give yourself, understanding that everyone has unique, schedules, walks of life, but trying to give yourself some time every week where you have complete unplanned time, and you can just kind of move at the pace of your own desire. So when I started this, it was an hour. It was literally just an hour that I could make, but it was an unplanned hour where I could just then move with, okay, what do I want to do with this time once I got in it? That could mean a variety of things. And now I give myself about 8 hours a week of fallow time. And what she has spoken to, which I found is really true within my practice, and I actually just shared this with one of the core apprentice playwrights who is investigating this as well, is that it provides a great stimulation for creativity organically, that it just allows you to kind of follow a path that you didn't expect, and there's surprise and discovery and the opportunity to have freedom and liberation from our overly scheduled lives, and then suddenly the creative mind is just like woo, and it's dancing. So that's something that I've been working on, and also talking to other artists I work with when they are feeling like there's such overwhelm in the life and not that kind of space to be roaming freely.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Amrita. We are getting some great questions in our chat, so I want to share those. So this one from Ida first. Any advice for how to carry these values in the rehearsal if you are not holding a leadership role? Anyone want to take that?
I think you just have to lead by example. Instead of saying something, do the thing you want to see in the room. If you need a break, just ask for a break. I think if you need clarification on something, ask for clarification. And this isn't to quote unquote take up space. I don't think you're asking that question. I think, for if it comes from an organic place, I think the doing is a stronger way to set an example than kind of whinging about something. There's strength in observation. I think looking at how other people handle stressful situations in a rehearsal room is really important. It's really important to be a good bystander. If you see someone being bullied in a rehearsal process, speak up, say something. Because if we don't, then the behavior will continue. So I would say if you're in that room, do something and be an example of a loving attention to self in a situation where your needs aren't being met.
That's great. Thank you. Here's a question from Lauren. She says, hi, I work with children in theater arts training classes and in directing elementary school musicals. Do you have any advice about creating a safe and healthy rehearsal space for children? Anyone want to venture to take that question?
I have a child, but I'm no expert.
What do you have a thought of what that might look like?
I mean, I think that we deal with this with our 5-year-old all the time. It's really important to me is the idea of consent is just very important for everyone, including children. And, like, for instance, at school recently, there's a child who grabs him a lot. And he's not mean-spirited. He just has some impulse control stuff going on. And I told our son, I was like, just tell him that you don't like it. And can he please stop? And he said, I did. And he doesn't listen. So I was like, I don't want you to feel like you're not being listened to if it's something about your body. So I wrote to his teachers and I said, this is happening. I don't want to fully get involved because I do think children should work out their own conflicts, but I want you to know that that's happening and he feels like he's not being listened to and it's about his body. So I think it's like the big lesson is consent. The other thing, which is what we do we just set it up in our own house, is we came up with house rules, which sounds a lot like what Anne sets up in the, we posted it, like Robbie wrote it on a piece of paper and we put it on the front door, and it just says like, these are the 5 rules that we go by in this house. And the number one thing is about gentle bodies. Like, everybody treats everybody's body with respect. And if someone tells you to stop, you stop. And I think setting up some really simple rules. I mean, there's only 5 of them, but they're very straightforward and they cover a lot of ground. And I think consent is a big lesson that children understand.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. I also have similar rules up in my household and by our door, so I appreciate that. We have a lot of other questions, so I want to, Anne, please.
I just want to say one thing too, is that the language around consent, questions like, is that okay? Just wipe them out of your vocabulary. Just wipe, is that okay? Yes or no questions, should turn into, how do you feel about that? What would you like me to know about that? So that kids start to frame their minds into, they're starting to knit those synapses to be able to verbalize what they need. And on stage is a perfect place because you have blocking, you have to learn how to take care of your costumes, you have to learn how to take care of your props. It's all kind of built into that environment where instead of saying, don't touch the props, don't da, 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 da. If you touch the props, we may lose them and that might hurt the play. So you have to kind of unfold it kids are so smart. They're so much smarter than we give them credit for. They will get it if we can break it down and explain it to them in an engaged way where they feel like they have license over their bodies and they have license to answer questions honestly without being afraid to disappoint us as adults.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's actually that I love the importance of language that you're bringing up here, Anne, in terms of how language really informs thought process, which I think not only applies obviously to the children, but it applies to all of us in our rehearsal rooms. Yeah, that's so important. I have another question here. When it's from Lena. I love the idea of ritual in our art practices and of harnessing our DNA ancestors. And she says, I work a lot with adoptees because I am an adoptive mom. Have you incorporated these rituals with folks who do not know their birth story? And then she also says, thank you so much for this space and dialogue.
Not that I know of, but that is an interesting, I think whether we know who our ancestors are or not by name, we still carry their DNA. And that's what we're tapping into there. It's not an actual person with, a 19th, 18th century bonnet on riding on the prairie, but we're talking about that energy work and the fact that the DNA of that person lives through us because science, that we should be able to tap into that humanness and that human intelligence that we carry with us. So it's interesting to think of a person not exactly knowing who their parents are or knowing, but having not been raised by those parents. I think the DNA is there and the ancestry is there, and the beauty and the health of bringing that forward, I think can happen whether you're adopted or not. But that's a very interesting question. I'm going to think about that.
Yeah. Hi, Lena. It's so great that you're here. Wanted to say that. And also, I love the question too. And something that I wanted to offer in response to it is a practice that I learned from the incredible Leslie Ishii, who's the artistic director of Perseverance and really beautiful director and dramaturg and actor and artist, is how do we, as Anne was saying, recognize the DNA of ancestry in our own inheritance, even if we do not know exactly how to trace our ancestors, and also how do we consider ourselves ancestors for 7 generations ahead of us. Regardless of whether or not we are having children, regardless of that, how do we also think of ancestry in that duality of what is past, what is present, and what is future? And I love the way that Leslie practices it, because I remember specifically we were in a space with a number of actors who had all self-identified as adoptees. And when Leslie brought that into the space, there was such meaning in the recognition of what ancestry is in terms of past carrying forward to the future and how each of them are a continuum of that.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Thank you for those responses, and thank you, Lena, for the question. Here's a question from Rebecca, which is, I think, picking up on some of our earlier conversation around what happens when you encounter resistance to your requests or cultural shifts. It's a tough one, it looks like.
Well, in the spirit of honesty, it really depends. Sometimes it means leaving, which I have done or advocated. Sometimes it means calling out or calling in. I think it really addresses, which I love about this question, so thank you, Rebecca, what is the type of resistance encountered, and what is the possibility of change that does not promote further harm or injury? And so I often look at those questions in an assessment of a situation and have navigated all of those possibilities, and all of the possibilities, also understanding the factors of financial security for the artists involved, understanding the factors of community and creativity in the space. But it has had a range. There have been moments where there has been a true fight for that cultural shift that is then met with whatever resistance, and also moments where sometimes the best thing to do is to step away from a culture that could continue to promote more harm.
Yeah, great, thank you. Seems like a lot of agreement with Amrita's answer. So we have time for one final question. So here's the question, which is, if you were to set up a writing group, what would be sort of the healthy practices that you would want to establish for that writing group?
I mean, I think it's important to set up a mode of feedback that everybody agrees on. I think a lot of people use the Liz Lerman guidelines, and I think they're generally really very good because they involve questions where you can say, I have a thought, do you want to hear it? And the writer is allowed to say no. So going along with the idea of consent, a lot of those guidelines are built on the idea that the writer, the person receiving the feedback, is the one kind of running the room and is able to say, yes, I want to hear that. No, I'm not ready to hear that. And everybody says, okay. I think that's really important to follow some kind of guidelines. I like those personally, but I honestly don't know what else is out there that might be equally good. Yeah, and I think setting up in the beginning a code of conduct for everyone, that because it's important to build the community first, and it's absolutely worth taking the time to do it, because then the work that you get to do is much better. So the way that you would start a production process, I would start a writers group with that same community building code of conduct that maybe everybody signs. And so then if someone steps out of that code, you can hold up the thing and say, this is what we agreed to. I think that's one way to do it. Yeah. But I don't know of the other guidelines out there. I've used Liz Lerman a lot because I like them, but I'm sure there's other good ones.
Yeah, that's really helpful, practical advice. Anyone else want to chime in? I see some head nodding anyway, some agreements with that.
I really agree with that. I was actually just thinking, I know Lavina Jadwani is here and was part of a writers group. We were part of a writers group together. So Lavina, I'm like literally trying to remember some of the practices there, but I agree with Rachel that I think code of conduct is really essential. I think process of feedback is really essential. And I would also say, well, the group that Lavina and I were part of was virtual in 2020. And I think that what it means to respond to the context of the time, I remember, now I remember actually, Lavina, although correct me if I'm wrong, because memory can be a trickster, that I think we did take just a lot of space for folks to take care of themselves, and tried to hold this healthy level of kind of joyful commitment while also understanding the changes in the world. And there were members of that group who experienced illness or had family members who were ill or had work that suddenly came up that they really needed to pay attention to, and what it meant to really embrace livelihood as part of this journey, and to give space for kind of the check-ins, the conversations, the way in which we could hold each other as human beings.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Thank you. We're coming to the close of our evening together, and I want to thank you, thank all of you, but particularly thank the three of you for your amazing insights and care. Some of the words that are coming to mind as we're leaving this are ritual and fallow time and process and generosity and consent, and consent and consent and in many iterations, and in inspiration to actually from Amrita. I just think that we should have a moment of joy to celebrate our time together. And for us, this is the first time that we have all been together in space, as it were. And I just, yeah, I'm just gonna applaud. It's my moment of thank you.
Yay!
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us. And I just want to wish everyone a really happy, healthy, safe, beautiful, generative new year. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley.
Yes.
Thank you both. Oh my
Bye.
goodness.
Everyone, this was such a great conversation, and thank you everyone out there for these questions and insights. I'm like trying to go through the chat and just be like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing.
Oh yeah, we will definitely copy this chat and make sure that we get to share all this wonderful information with all of you and all the
Wonderful.
love. So thank you, and thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.